This is the Chapter 5, Section 2 podcast. And this is on limits to growth. Let me get the highlighter going here. Here we go. This is on limits to growth. We've talked about populations, and we talked about how they grow, and we talked about when they reach a problem with the resources, an absence of resources, that then we have logistic growth. And now we're going to look at some of these limits to growth. So the main key we're going to talk about is what factors limit population growth. Now here's a little review. We talked about primary productivity in the last section, and that's when we talk about an insufficient supply of a nutrient. And we looked at this barrel picture, and we were looking at a nutrient. In this case, the limiting nutrient will be potassium, and that's the nutrient that there's the least of in this situation, and that's the nutrient. That's the nutrient that's going to limit the growth of an organism, the population of the organism. So we call these substances limiting nutrients. So, and this is an example of a larger ecological concept called a limiting factor, and we have a bunch of limiting factors right here, and we're going to talk about 5 of them, and we're going to separate them into 2 types: a density dependent factor and a density independent factor. And these are the 5 factors that we're going to talk about that limit population size. So a density dependent factor is one that depends on the population size as it is, and they can include competition, predation, and parasitism, and disease. Parasitism and disease are we're going to talk about pretty much together. Now, these only come into play. They only operate when the population reaches a certain level, and they're going to be most strongly felt when you have a very large and dense population. If you look at, and they don't affect the small and scattered populations. Let's look at these 2 pictures. This is what I would call a large and dense population. These tall trees are crowding each other out, and they're fighting for the sunlight. So we're going to have competition right there. That's a densely populated area. Whereas on the floor of this, probably the same forest, you have these ferns, and if you look, the ferns are pretty well spread out, so they're not really that close to each other, so they're not going to be competing for light or for nutrients in the soil or for water. They're pretty much not going to affect each other. So what is competition? Competition is when organisms are competing for things such as food, water, space, sunlight. Just like we talked on the last picture, we saw those trees competing for sunlight. These penguins, I put these penguins down here because it seemed to be a pretty densely populated area, and this is what we call interspecies competition, when they're in the same species. They're competing. These guys are competing for the same space, food, mates. And we also have competition between species. And here I have competition between this group of hyenas here and this lion. They're competing over the same, looks like the remains of a water buffalo there. And this, what can happen in this case is you can end up with leading to evolutionary changes, meaning one species adapting and changing so it can survive better versus another species. And what happens is they become so different, the 2 species, that they will occupy different niches over time. And that being the case with the hyena and the lion, they may compete over the same food, but there are other resources that they're not competing over, so they're in different niches. Predation. And predation is, we've talked about this, is the predator-prey relationship will control population. Here I like this picture because this is a killer whale eating a porpoise, or trying to catch a porpoise. And this one you know pretty well. If there are a large amount of organisms, real densely populated, it's going to make it a great place for the predators to hunt and to make it very easy for them to capture prey. If the population of the prey is small, then it's going to be harder for the predators. Here's an example. This is actually a very famous study of wolf and moose populations on Isle Royale. And if you look at the chart, you can see that when the moose population, which is in red, goes up, there are more moose available for the wolves, so the wolves capture more moose. I'm looking at this area right here. You can see it. The moose population's gone up, so the wolves have more prey, and then as they eat more of the moose numbers die down, and which is going to affect the wolf population. Here's an even better chart of it with looking at hares and lynxes, and you can see that when the hare population spikes, the lynx population then will also go up. Here's a great example. Here's the hare population went up, so there's a lot more hare to eat. So the lynx population went up also as a result of that. Then as the hares start to be eaten and their population numbers go down, that affects the lynx, and the lynx population goes down. Parasites. And parasites are another factor that can limit it. Parasite, we said, lives in or on another organism and consequently harms it. This is parasitic wasp larvae that have actually been laid right on top of a caterpillar, and they do it to a couple different species of caterpillar, but the larvae are actually feeding from the caterpillar. The caterpillar is basically eating for himself and for all these larvae, and this is obviously taking away resources from the caterpillar. Density independent factors are ones that affect all the populations no matter what the size of the population is. This is a picture of drought. It doesn't matter how many organisms there are, they're all going to be affected the same way by drought. Other examples include unusual weather such as a hurricane or a big snowstorm, natural disasters, seasonal cycles such as that would be a snowstorm would be a seasonal cycle. At the end of winter, at the end of the fall, when winter comes, that's going to limit the population. And then activities. Here's some example of clear cutting. This will definitely limit the amount of population no matter how dense it is there. And this is another picture I really liked. What it's showing is this is a reef right here, a coral reef, and what I wanted to show was that if you have a natural disaster or man-made disaster at a man-made event in a mangrove swamp, it could then affect a coral reef nearby because some of the fish that eventually end up living in the reef their nursery essentially is the mangrove swamp, and then they migrate over to the reef. And if you destroy the mangrove swamp, it actually controls the population at the reef. Here you see there's no mangrove swamp, so all these little orange and green fish have no place to the smaller, the younger fish don't have a place to hide, so they're eventually wiped out. And you can see as a result, there's none of the orange and green fish, and you can see the numbers of the white and the yellow and black fish are reduced because they don't have the mangrove swamp to hide in when they're really young and not able to defend themselves. On to the quiz.